All right, here we go. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today for today's workshop. Steve McCarty with McConkey and TechSolve. He'll be presenting today on investigations going beyond the blame. At this point, I'd like to thank our sponsor, who is Moser Roofing Solutions. We thank you for your support. And with that, without further ado, we'll let Steve take over.
Okay, great. Thanks, Seth. Can everybody hear me okay? Everybody hear me okay?
Sounds good to me.
Yep.
Okay, very good. Thanks.
Yep,
Thanks.
sounds good.
Yeah. Before I put up the slide deck, just wanted to kind of give a little bit of a background. So Seth has come to, I guess, two or three of the McConkey and TechSolve risk control workshops. McConkey, a local insurance broker; TechSolve, local safety consulting firm that works closely with McConkey. And I guess Seth had asked if I would be willing to share a little bit of a condensed version of the recent safety workshop we did back at the end of November for some mutual clients. So kind of adapted it to this 1 hour or less format. And so I appreciate the opportunity for you guys to participate. And really just, as one safety person to another, being in the safety field for a little over, I guess, 31 years or so, like you guys, you've probably seen a lot of different accident investigation forms. You've probably developed your own. What I'll be sharing with you, kind of, I think, a tool that you can use part, all, or none as you see fit. For me, was just kind of the culmination, certainly, of a project I was working on at a previous employer with a client that really took the best of what I had known or worked with over that kind of almost a 3-year period until now. So if nothing else, I think one takeaway, the tool that I think Seth already sent out to you, this accident incident analysis review form, hopefully that you'll either are doing something very similar already, or you might find bits and pieces of this that you like, or use it as is. But wanted to just kind of share a little bit of the whole accident investigation process with you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Steve, before you get started, please mute, everyone mute your mic. And then also, I sent out, if you have not printed out the accident worksheet, the form that was with the today's reminder email, please print that out because we'll be using it later.
Thanks, Seth. Okay. I think everybody should be seeing that screen, effective accident investigation. So just a little bit of some background. Does everybody see the screen okay?
Yes.
Okay. So that's my face. You get any rats in the room, they can run from now at this point. But just wanted to kind of level set things here in terms of objectives. Talk briefly about the difference between accident and incident. I think all of us probably know that. What's the importance or benefit of conducting effective accident investigations rather than just checking the box, completing the form? We'll briefly review a 10-step accident investigation process. It'll be more so for your review in the PDF of the PowerPoint slide deck that Seth will send out afterwards. Become familiar with this accident. Say again? Become familiar with this form, and then we'll have a little bit of a case study at the end where, as Seth alluded to, we'll want you to use that form. Hopefully you have a hard copy printed out or something on your other screen that you can review. But we want to apply this form to pretty much an accident that actually occurred that we've modified slightly for purposes of this webinar. So as I think most folks already know, accident, incident, almost used interchangeably, but for the most part, folks in the safety field will say it's an unplanned, unwanted event where there's actually resulting harm to people, damage to or loss of property or the environment. Where an incident is an unplanned, unwanted event where a slight difference in conditions, a fraction of a second, fraction of an inch, could have resulted in employee injury, property damage, or environment. A near miss or near hit is another way that we can describe that. So at least for the purposes of this presentation, that's how I'll differentiate between the two. Some of you may use that interchangeably, and that's fine. But in terms of the benefits, as I think we know, when accident investigation is done well, we're able, really the bottom line is prevent recurrence, right? We don't want to see the same thing happen to that person or anybody else, whether it's at that location, that job site, or another one in the future. And we really do that by identifying and eliminating hazards. We do want to, in that process, expose any gaps or deficiencies that we might find. And when we're addressing employee concerns, as part of an overall safety program or safety management system, there's better employee morale because employees know their health and well-being is important. Most of us are familiar with this pyramid. A lot of unsafe acts and conditions, behaviors, things that are all around us all the time that sometimes just blend into the woodwork. And sometimes those conditions or behaviors may result in a near miss or a near hit, where, again, just a fraction of an inch or second is the difference between a non-event and some kind of loss. A lot of those in those two lower sections, we typically traditionally have not investigated. We're not maybe unaware of those as folks that have a safety role, or maybe we are, and there's less scrutiny that sometimes apply to those. But I would contend that the more we use this process with conditions and behaviors or near misses, in addition to minor or major injuries, that we're likely to yield better results. So most of the time when somebody has to go to the clinic or the hospital, we're completing an investigation, but sometimes those minor things get unaddressed. Maybe we don't know about them, or maybe we think they're no big deal, but the more we apply this kind of process to even the near misses and below that, I think the better off we are to prevent injuries in the future. This one slide we talked about, I mentioned in the objectives, 10 accident incident investigation steps in that process. I just want to briefly mention them. In the slide deck, there are several more slides that just elaborate on this a little more. But just as a quick review, in terms of these sequential steps, if there is an incident, maybe there's a spill, a leak, something that may contribute to fire or explosion, we want to stabilize the situation first, kind of turn off the flow, stop something from spilling or causing further damage, caring for the injured employee. So those are kind of the two immediate critical, let's take care of those things right away. We want to isolate the scene, especially if it's a major incident, because we're going to want to take a closer look at what's going on. And the more we can barricade the area to keep other folks out, the more pristine or as the conditions were when the accident occurred is going to be representative, so that we can, when we're talking with the person or persons that were involved or witnesses, and are gathering evidence, photos on our cell phone cameras, things are kind of as they were when the incident occurred, right? So we interview informally, at least, hey, what happened? What did you see? And this is more of a quick verbal. And we take some pictures. Again, I'm referring primarily probably to more serious incidents. Reviewing records, whether, obtaining witness statements, injured employee statements, maybe reviewing maintenance records, things along those lines. We do all that, and then we can really determine the causal factor or factors, typically more than one, right? And only after we determine those causal factors can we identify actions to prevent recurrence. then we, once we find out, hey, okay, this is what we're going to do, we implement it, and then we verify, plan, do, check, act, right? So those are the 10 steps. We'll focus really primarily going forward in determining causal factors and identifying actions to prevent recurrence. So I'm just going to skip these slides here. So in determining causal factors, they're, kind of the domino effect, the direct or immediate cause. That's what we really see. The final domino in the sequence, the immediate cause of the injury, but there's, some kind of behind that, an indirect cause, whether it's an unsafe or at-risk behavior or unsafe condition that's driving that. And then we look to the root cause, what kind of management system, deficiency or inadequacy, procedures and work practices, tools and equipment, and so on. The next slide is one that you're probably familiar with to some level. Kind of the more superficial things are like the weed, the dandelion that grows above the ground, and our tendency in our lawns, is hey, pull the dandelion, and okay, we're good for the moment, but if we don't get it at the root, it's going to come back, right? And so I think as folks that are in a safety role, a lot of times, whether it's us or maybe a foreman or a superintendent, they're looking kind of at that immediate cause, the things that they can see, the hazardous conditions, the unsafe work practices, and they're just addressing the surface things. But as safety professionals or folks that have safety as a collateral duty, we want to try to drive down below the surface to get at the root cause or causes, in terms of, poor, inadequate procedures, lack of training, not following training. And, a lot of times that boils down to poor supervision, poor management. Maybe we don't have the right equipment for the job, lack of supervision. Again, rules not enforced, things along those lines. So I think our challenge is to go beyond what we can see in the foreground and really look at what's driving what we're seeing behind the scenes, if you will. Again, nothing really new to us, just kind of a reminder. And as we talk about actions to prevent recurrence, most of us, if not all of us, are probably familiar with the hierarchy of controls. And, a lot of times, especially at construction job sites, we're very focused on PPE, personal protective equipment, rightfully so. But that's at the bottom of the effectiveness of this sequence. If we can eliminate hazards, eliminate a fall hazard by having guardrail systems in place, or doing something from the ground, right? If we can replacing light bulbs, if we have extension poles that we can unscrew lights, screw in new lights from the ground level, we eliminate that fall hazard. Can we substitute maybe a lesser hazardous chemical in a situation? Engineering controls, how can we isolate people from the hazard, whether that's machine guarding, that would be probably, a typical example. Administrative controls, we're talking procedures and enforcement. And then again, that last line of defense is PPE. The following slides are cartoons that I think illustrate this concept pretty well. So here we have the hazard. We have got a tall guy and a pipe that goes down to 6 feet above the passageway. So this guy's tall. He hits his head. He's seeing he's got knocked out, right? And so we got a hazard here. How do we eliminate the hazard? Well, kind of maybe the initial reaction would be, oh, well, we just the personal protective factors, as this left little block shows. Okay, give the guy the hard hat. Okay, well, we haven't eliminated the hazard, and if he bumps into it, maybe the bump cap actually would be the better PPE if we're going to PPE. Work practices or procedures and training. Hey, let's train him to kind of bend at the waist, not at or bend at the knees, not the waist, and kind of duck under it in conjunction with his bump cap, and maybe even a warning system, right? Kind of signage maybe some kind of audible warning. All of these don't eliminate the hazard. They maybe point it out or lessen the effect, but they're kind of the least effective methods. From a guarding standpoint, the mitigation system, the cell on the left, hey, we've insulated or put some foam cushioning on the pipe, so somebody can still bump their head, but they'll have that cushion, kind of maybe a little bit better than the bump cap, but still the hazard's there, and you have to deal with maintenance and inspection. The foam's going to deteriorate, or it's going to come off, and then the hazard's still a major issue. And so, if we can design it out, eliminate it, in this case, the far right cell, we raise the pipe from 6 feet to 8 feet. And so now, unless you're the tallest player in the NBA, you're good, and you won't strike your head. So just, I thought a nice little cartoon that I ran across in putting this together that I thought illustrated the concept of the hierarchy of controls pretty well. So the importance of identifying the causal factors. If we don't identify all the causal factors, the incident is likely to recur, pulling the dandelion out just at the surface, not at the roots. But when we use a systematic framework to identify causal factors and make sure that we have an action to prevent recurrence for each causal factor, the more likely we are to eliminate future accidents. And this accident incident analysis review form that you folks have received is a way that can be used to investigate or analyze an incident or an accident and try to prevent recurrence. So what if you have the form up on a screen, or if you have a hard copy printed out, feel free to just look at the form. You can, if you'd like, just follow along with the slide deck. In this form, again, I put this version of this together probably 2 years ago. It's a little condensed from a previous version that was developed for a larger client. But there are 5 causal factor categories here: tools and equipment, procedures and work practices, the work environment, people, and management systems. So in each of those 5 causal factor categories, there are multiple questions where you can answer yes, no, or not applicable. If you answer yes to any of those questions, you're saying, hey, this is safe. There's not an issue here, not a contributing factor. Any question that's answered no, we're saying, hey, this is something that we need to identify an action to prevent recurrence. And obviously, if it's NA, it's just not applicable. So we can kind of check that and move on. And just from experience, there can be, let's say, for example, multiple items check no, and you could have one follow-up action or action to prevent recurrence that could address both of those. But you want to make sure, if you're using this form or something similar, that for every no, you have some follow-up action or action to prevent recurrence, to address, to help prevent an injury from occurring in the future. So that first section with tools and equipment, have we specified tools for the correct tool for the job? If so, is that tool or equipment available? Is it being used? Is it being used correctly? And those two could be combined. And were the tools and equipment, were they, including PPE, in safe condition? So we have the tool. Is it right for the job? Is it used correctly? Is it in safe condition, right? Not a new concept, but just kind of flushing it out a little bit with those questions. So that's tools and equipment. And again, that can include PPE. The second section is procedures and work practices. Is there, not unlike the tools and equipment, is there a written procedure for the job? And if so, does that procedure or work practice anticipate the relevant hazards associated with the task? And so if it does, is that procedure or work practice known and understood by the employees involved in the incident and even others? And then if it's known and understood, is it being followed? Question 4. And then finally, do production demands and workflow allow for the safe work procedure to be followed? So maybe we have something in writing which looks good on paper, but can't be followed based on the nature of the job or the work environment. That's what this question is getting at. Again, the beauty of the fact that you guys, I believe, have this in a Word version, if you like the concept, but don't like some of the questions or, would like to word them differently, you're at liberty to do that. So we have tools and equipment, procedures and work practices, and then we have the work environment. Were there any environmental conditions that may have contributed? When we think about that, we're talking about housekeeping and orderliness conditions. Were they adequate? Other environmental conditions like lighting, noise, air contaminants, temperature, ventilation, vibration, all of those things. Were any of those things a potential factor? And the last couple, were these unsafe conditions, were they recognized? And then if so, were they corrected or at least reported by affected employees? So we want to make sure that we're looking at the general work environment, whether that's a housekeeping and orderliness thing, or if we're looking at, more from an industrial hygiene standpoint, we have anything from a noise, contaminant, illumination level that we need to be concerned about. And that fourth category, people factors, and this is kind of the employees themselves. Were behaviors and work practices considered safe? What the employees were doing at the time of the injury, was that considered a safe work practice? Were employees involved? Were they trained in how to safely conduct this task? Were they adequate? Did they have adequate experience in conducting? So it's one thing to be trained on something. It's another to actually be proficient or at least functional, adequately being able to perform the job. Were the employees physically capable of performing the job? In ergonomics, we want to match the abilities and limitations of the employee with the demands of the job. Was there a good fit there? Did the employee exhibit any signs or symptoms of impairment in any way? Drugs, alcohol, especially the past few years where in construction, leads all industries in suicide. So, and people kind of medicate themselves to address problems in their lives. And then the last one, were there any signs of distraction? Earbuds, cell phone use, personal issues, somebody, death in the family, a marriage that's going south, things like that might inhibit somebody's ability to focus on the task at hand. And then finally, management systems. And by that, we mean, we're looking at a few different things. Formal inspections and observations, have they been completed consistently to detect the type of at-risk behavior or unsafe condition that was involved in this incident? So are we doing any kind of inspection or observation to detect these kinds of issues? And if so, have they been identified in the past? So have they been identified? And then thirdly, if they've been identified, have appropriate corrective actions been implemented to prevent recurrence? And then, kind of like the plan, do, check, act, were they effective if we implemented something in the past? And the last few deal more kind of at the supervisory level. Is there adequate supervision of that employee? Is it a lone worker versus, maybe employee on a crew, but they're less seasoned, but they've been sent off to do a job kind of on their own, a little bit away from where the main crew's working? Is there adequate supervision? And then really number 6 and 7 are the carrot and the stick. Are we recognizing and hopefully at least periodically rewarding employees that are consistently working safely? And then the stick, are we taking disciplinary action for persistent at-risk behaviors? All right. So these are the 5 sections. The questions can be edited, but I think that at least for me, this has been a tool that has been helpful as I go through these 5 causal factor categories and the questions within to try and identify those specific causal factors. And then once we do that, we can identify actions to prevent recurrence. Before we go on to the case study for a job site delivery driver, does anybody have any questions or comments about the form or anything that we've talked about? Okay.
I have one.
Yes.
Do you have any guidance on, or at least from your perspective, when you advise folks to shut down a job entirely? I know you talk about isolating the area and things like that, but what about the decision to shut down the job in its entirety? I've heard arguments both ways on that. Just curious to hear, is it part of gathering more information, your thoughts on that?
I think it's a really good question. I don't know that I have a great answer. I do think if there's been a serious injury in an area where you've got a lot of people, I think that would be, it's good to have a stand down for at least a period of time to figure out what's going on, stabilize the situation, get, the EMS folks in. So I don't think I have a hard and fast rule, but I think if you're calling the ambulance, that may be a good indicator of, we need to shut things down. And even thinking along those lines, if someone is hospitalized for a work-related injury, the likelihood of OSHA showing up or, at least sending a letter, but more than likely showing up is greater. So I think that lends itself to saying, hey, let's shut it down, at least in this area, until we stabilize, figure out what's going on, and are able to gather evidence and kind of start to figure out how to prevent recurrence. So I don't know if that's a great answer, but I think that's kind of at least just shooting from the hip. That's my initial thought. I don't know if anybody else from your experience has some better or additional rules of thumb.
Well, I might just offer that you're spot on with the shutdown in anticipation of OSHA, only because you're disrupting evidence of a federal investigation. So you definitely want to lock down the area, and to the extent it would facilitate OSHA coming in, their investigation would be great. And shutting down the job, make sure that when OSHA comes, there's nothing for them to look at other than the incident there. If they see other violations in plain view, you can be cited for those, even if they're coming to investigate something different. So by shutting the job down, you remove any other potential violations they could identify.
Yes, very good. And just a quick aside, I did a mock OSHA inspection for a client a couple of months ago, and the upper management team knew I was coming, but some of the folks involved didn't know. And but one of the things that they instructed their employees to do is, we had a situation where a mock injury, somebody got their hands caught in a power press. The new plant manager had instructed, hey, let's keep all forklift traffic. We're shutting down all forklift traffic while the OSHA inspector's here. So just a similar or an application of what you just mentioned as well. And anybody else? Okay, so we're going to take a look at a case study, and we'll really want everybody as we get to a certain point here to use the form, to take some time. I'm going to share some information with you, give you an opportunity to ask some additional questions that may not be in black and white on a slide, and then kind of take a few minutes to go through the form and try to identify some causal factors and actions to prevent recurrence. So let's take a look at this. And this is based on an injury that actually occurred for a client. A driver was making a ground level delivery to a job site, and they were reorienting the pallet of material with a manual pallet jack on the lift gate. They were reorienting it for the forklift to come over and remove that pallet from the back of the box truck. This would normally, at this job site, so this employee, while he was, reorienting that pallet with the manual pallet jack, he fell off the lift gate, hit his elbow, his hip, and his back. Went to the clinic. No, these were not life-threatening or didn't require hospitalization, but the employee did lose a couple days of work from this incident. Now, this particular delivery would have happened as a cross-dock delivery from the truck to the warehouse that was at this job site. But there was some concrete work being done at the loading dock that prevented that cross-dock delivery from happening. This is actually a photograph of the back of that box truck of that order before it was delivered to the job site. And you can see kind of in the center of the screen and toward the left, you see the pallet that's stretch wrapped, and then you see the manual pallet jack, which is kind of in there sideways. I think the thought process behind that was, just to keep it more stable during transportation, but it's kind of in there, and that on the right end of the pallet instead of in front of us. So that's kind of what it looked like before the truck went to the job site. And I'll just show you these pictures here. And this was just mocked up after the fact, but you can see, with an elevated lift gate, you're over 4 feet above the, or at least 4 feet above the ground. And this guy's using the manual pallet jack to reorient the pallet so that the forklift can, get to the proper openings in that pallet to remove it. And you can see, in the left picture, he's pretty close actually to that far side of the lift gate. And in the right picture, he's, actually, it's reversed. In that left picture, he's pretty close to the front edge. And in the right picture, he's pretty close to that far edge. So, when he's rotating that, there's definitely opportunity for somebody to fall. So just a little more information. The concrete work that was being done could not be scheduled for a different or a later date. It was a tight project schedule. Many other deliveries to other job sites are ground drops. There's no elevated loading dock at a lot of these locations. The driver himself, who was the same person that was reorienting that pallet with the pallet jack, they're a seasoned employee. They're a good driver. They're experienced in using the manual pallet jack. Those were not issues. The post-accident drug testing that did occur was negative for drugs and alcohol. So based on that, and again, that's kind of, you had a little bit of a snapshot, but if you're whether you're the foreman, superintendent, or you as a person that's doing, safety duties for your company, if you're investigating or analyzing this accident, what are some additional questions that you might have that weren't covered in the previous slides related to tools and equipment, procedures, work practices, work environment, people, and management systems? So what are some questions that you folks might have related to any of these categories?
Would this is Seth, would the pallet be able to be oriented on there enough just to get it back down to the ground?
Yes, it could be.
So it'll fit on the platform without turning it around necessarily.
Oh, well, if we go back to the picture, the way the pallet was put into the forklift, you had to do some rotation to, to at least get the manual pallet jack out of the out from underneath the pallet.
Okay.
So there's enough room on the lift, but the way the pallet jack's in there, you've got to kind of swing it around a little bit to get the manual pallet jack out, if you will, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
What other questions would you folks have? Now, the pictures you saw were not taken as far as the guy moving the pallet, weren't taken on the day of the incident. Anything related to work environment questions that you would have, especially if you're coming into this cold, maybe you were off and you're coming in the next day or following day, anything work environment related that you would ask about?
Was the ground flat? Looked like it was a flat area.
Yes, it was. In that case, it was. It was a flat area. There was no incline to cause equipment or people to be a little off balance. So good question. It was level ground.
It wasn't raining, so it wouldn't be slippery.
Right. And again, the picture, we took was, nice sunny day. And I don't recall specifically the exact weather, but there were no weather conditions in terms of snow, rain, ice, anything along those lines to create any slippery conditions.
Was there a fork at the site to get it off the truck, or is it just a manual jack?
At this particular site, there was a forklift because they have the warehouse there, but they weren't able to use that particular, the loading dock because of the cement work that was going on. But there was a forklift at that location.
Oh, but not on the ground. Okay.
Well, the forklift was available at ground level. The premise of that was that the driver was reorienting that pallet or getting his pallet jack out of the way so that the forklift could come over and take the pallet. There was a ramp so the forklift could get in and out of the warehouse through a ramp door, as opposed to the truck not being able to do that and needing to be at the elevated loading dock under normal conditions.
So this is where the accident report form comes in then.
Yeah, I think the whole premise here is, we're trying to figure out why, right? A lot of folks or some folks use the 5 why analysis to conduct an accident investigation. And this is a little bit different way of just kind of slicing and dicing the causal factors. But we're, ultimately trying to figure out what led up to this and how we prevent recurrence. And some of these questions that, Seth, you've asked, in terms of, weather conditions, grade, are all things that we should be looking at. Instead of just kind of jumping to a conclusion, we should be, kind of going through a process, whether it's these exact questions or others, but we really should systematically be looking at the different causal factor categories. Does anybody else that's on the line want to ask some questions related to tools and equipment, procedures and work practices? And, Seth, kind of tools and equipment, there was a forklift available, right? So that's another consideration. But anybody else? So the 7 to 10 seconds of awkward silence, and no one else has chimed in yet. One more opportunity. Anybody else? Anything we haven't talked about, or maybe something that Seth has brought up or I've mentioned that you wanted to flush out a little more? So I tell you what, go ahead, just kind of on your own. You know, when we did this at McConkey, for those that were there in person, they were in small teams. For those that attended virtually, we were in, kind of those team rooms. But for the purposes of this, let's just, take several minutes. If you have a hard copy of that form, would encourage you to kind of go through the form and, kind of check the yeses, nos, and NAs. And as you're doing that, if you have questions, just, chime in, and it may help others who might be thinking about that as well, or maybe they're not thinking about it currently, but should be. So take several minutes here and kind of go through the form on that first page and at the top of the second, and then we'll talk about actions to be taken once you do that.
Steve, do you have a copy of that just so everyone knows what you're talking about? Would you be able to put that up on the screen by chance?
I'm sorry, say that again, Seth.
You're talking about the accident form, going over
Yes.
that sent out earlier. Do you have a copy you can put on the screen just to show people that might not have that and would review this at a later date?
Yeah, let me see here, Seth.
Perfect.
Shrink that down a little bit.
So the people on this call, if you haven't received this, just chime in. We'll give everyone 5 more minutes to answer the yes and no column on these worksheets.
Yeah, Seth, if we can just at 2:55, so kind of 4 more minutes, that'd be great. Thank you. About one more minute. Okay. So just for the sake of time, and Kennedy has some pretty advanced skills in Zoom with kind of drawing there. But anyway, just for the sake of time, in terms of the categories, somebody share, if you identified a no in tools and equipment, please unmute and share your finding there. Anyone with tools and equipment?
I didn't see anything in tools and equipment. I had yes for that, but the next one, the procedures and work practices.
Seth, why don't you start us off there? Go ahead.
Yeah, as far as the procedures and work practices, the skid should never been loaded in there like that. It should have been loaded without the manual jack underneath it, so a ground forklift could get it out easily, and that would solve the problem. If there was enough room in the truck to move that forklift or the manual jack out in the truck, spin it around in the truck, it would have fixed it. Or if it was just as is, but not underneath the pallet, I think the fork truck could have gone in and got it sideways. So it
Right.
should have been.
Yeah. So what did you check no there in procedures and work practices?
Was number 4 and 5 were definitely no's.
Okay. Okay. And one thing that was evident in the investigation, there really wasn't a written procedure, but the common work practice was really derived from ground drops. And so it didn't take into consideration, if it was a cross dock delivery versus ground drop. And so it wasn't customized. To your point, Seth, if that would have been determined ahead of time, if they had other job sites to deliver to, they could have kept that manual pallet jack further back in the truck with other deliveries and leave that front edge open so that you can just kind of bring the forklift up to the dock. Right. So that whole process of, is there a procedure or work practice? There's nothing written. The informal practice was really not well defined for the different scenarios that they encountered.
Yes, I would say so.
Okay. Anybody else on work procedure and work practice factors? So
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, it goes back to what you were talking about with the investigative questions, of did they have, I mean, you already told us that they didn't, or that it was developed for something else. But yeah, my question is, was there a policy and the employee is just not following it? Or do we just not have this written down or taught or trained at all? And it's just, whatever seemed right to the guy who was loading the truck at the time. And that's why I did it that way. And same for the guy who's unloading it. And are they trained on how to see an unsafe situation and what to do when they see that, rather than just try and make it work?
Right, right. So that the current work practice is there is a methodology for loading, for load securement, but it really doesn't anticipate the hazards at the job site. It's fine for that loading, the cross-dock loading that takes place, but it doesn't anticipate the whether it's cross-dock or ground drop at the job site. So obviously procedures and work practice is something that is being addressed, needs to be addressed. Procedure written, communicated effectively, not only the folks in the warehouse, the folks at the job site as well. So good feedback. We did mention earlier the environmental conditions. There was nothing in terms of noise, heat, light, wind, rain, those kinds of things. Really, that was pretty much NA there. In terms of the people factors, any feedback here? And again, obviously, some of this relates to the procedures and work practice, but anybody check anything no in people factors that you want to share with the group?
Yeah, I mean, assuming that that the policy would not have commanded that he do otherwise, then it's not that he loaded it incorrectly, but on the unloading side, obviously, number one, the behaviors were not safe. So then you got to go to two, were they trained on how to safely do it? And I think we could probably guess no based on the policy. And
Correct.
so then you go from there of like, okay, we need to train our people of if you can't unload if you're going to have to swing out like that with the pallet jack, there's not enough room for you and the pallet jack on this lift gate. This is what you do.
I agree.
Exactly.
I agree with you, Corey, that you would have them the policy only swing the manual jack into the truck, never out. Right? Or no? Is that what you're saying?
Or something like that, just identifying what he should have done. Well, one, I mean, assuming we're already going to address how it's being loaded, but even with it loaded that way, what do you do when the truck shows up and it's loaded that way? Swinging it in might be a solution if there's enough room for that. If not, what do you do? Just, working through that and then training the people on it.
Right. Right. And we did indicate there weren't any signs or symptoms of impairment. We don't have reason to believe that the employee wasn't physically capable. They had done the job multiple times before. This wasn't a strain injury or lack of awareness as well. And no indications of distraction from the investigation that was done. There wasn't a lot of information that we shared with you in this, but no indications of distraction. And then really just kind of in closing, the management system factors. And I'll just share this. They do job site inspections. Do you think those job site inspections include deliveries? What would be your gut feeling based on your own experience? Think they would include that?
What was the question again?
So so they're doing job site inspections there, but does the scope of the job site inspection include deliveries? And maybe just think of your own job site inspections that you folks do. Would they typically include deliveries?
Now they will be.
Right. So certainly in the past they haven't. That's an opportunity, and whether that's part of their inspection or just kind of supervisory, kind of observing your employees, right, doing their jobs. Again, these delivery folks, kind of out on their own. But if there's a foreman on the job site or a superintendent, that person can, be mindful of that as well. So, maybe another item here is, we really don't do a good job for the delivery piece of this in terms of formal inspection. So we're doing them. They really don't address the at-risk behavior here. So that might be an opportunity for observation going forward. And then, just kind of closing it out, just to wrap it up, recognizing and rewarding safe work practices, doing disciplinary action. That really wasn't covered in any bullet point on the slide. This customer actually does a pretty good job, especially for their delivery folks, in terms of making sure they do their pre-trips and are operating their trucks safely. But that's an area where, again, not unlike maybe the foreman observing supervisor, that delivery driver, maybe that's something they should be focusing a little more on as well. So, in the actions to be taken, obviously we talked about a written procedure to be developed that anticipates the delivery method at the job site. And if it's multiple, deliveries, you want to accommodate that loading in a way that if there's pallet unloading that occurs at ground level, that you're not having to go out on that lift gate with the pallet jack. And then, as one of you mentioned, conducting training for the employees, the folks that load and the folks that deliver. That's two different groups of people, right? And maybe we would have another follow-up action in terms of, we may want to put better eyes on the delivery piece here. We're doing a really good job at job sites and observing the crews working, but how about the delivery driver? Yeah, we're using, dash cam and telematics when they're driving, but what about when they're, at the job site? So that may be another opportunity there. So I know we're a little past the hour, but any questions or comments related to this form or anything that we've reviewed here this afternoon?
Well, I think, Steve, is there a way, if viewers need to get a hold of you, whether let's just at a later date or right now, is there a way they could contact you if they have any further questions?
Yeah, actually, I stopped sharing my screen, but the last slide in the slide deck has my McConkey and TechSolve email addresses. So when you send that out, Seth, that will be there.
Okay. Yes, I will make sure that I send that out. But for the viewers of this recording, could you pop that up real quick, your information one last time? And we do thank you, as on behalf of the KCA Safety Committee, we thank you for sharing your expertise on this topic. And I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Moser Roofing Solutions.
Yeah, Seth, I pulled that up, just that last slide. steve.mccarty@ekmcconkey.com or smccarty@techsolve.com.
And I will get that out to everybody as well.
Yep. Okay. And, and just like in this call, we're kind of all in this together and, kind of sharing successes, failures, best practices. We kind of iron sharpens iron. And I think we, as folks that do safety, we learn from each other and can share with each other. So hopefully, there's at least one thing everybody can take away to kind of, sharpen the blade, if you will.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again, Steve.
Thank
Any
you,
other
Seth. Thank you, everybody, for letting me participate today.